Hey mama, welcome back for another video. Today I'm going to be talking all about how much protein do new mothers need. In my last video last week, you'll remember that I touched on why protein is the #1 nutrient that I recommend for new mums, and you can watch that one here. Today I'm going to start more generally and then I'll go a little bit more specific, get a little bit more granular for people who like to know the ins and outs and like to crunch the numbers. Of course, with anything nutritional, there's going to be individual variability here, so that's where working with someone trained in nutrition can be valuable. Generally speaking, I'm recommending to the mothers that I work with to aim for around 100 grams of protein coming from mostly high quality sources. I spoke about the differences in various protein sources in my last video, how we define high quality sources of protein, the differences between animal and plant sources of protein. So if you haven't watched that or need a refresher, you can go to the video which will be linked up here or down below. But as a very quick recap, when considering the quality of a protein source food, we are talking about two factors. We're talking about the amino acid content and the bioavailability of the protein in that food. By these metrics, animal foods are the highest quality proteins. Therefore, I'm recommending to mothers to get around 100 grams of protein from mostly animal foods. This includes meat of all kinds, organs, fish, seafood, eggs, and dairy. Then, for variety and enjoyment of food, I say include some plant-source proteins that you like and enjoy to make up that other smaller portion. This would include soy-based products like tofu and edamame, raw nuts and seeds, which also includes things like hemp, quinoa, and then our legumes, so our lentils, chickpeas, and beans. Now we can get more specific than just a single recommendation of 100 grams for all mothers because there is individual variability. We can calculate a mother's protein needs based on her weight. This is the typical way that protein needs are calculated in the nutrition space. There are some other ways, for example, calculating by height or calculating by distribution of total caloric intake, so like a percentage of how many calories you eat. But I really like the calculation by weight. Now it's worth noting here that the amounts that I recommend for new mothers are much higher than the RDI, the recommended daily intake. There are multiple issues with using the RDI as our benchmark. First of all, RDIs were calculated many decades ago based on fairly crude measures, fairly crude ways of understanding protein needs. In more recent years, there have been much more accurate ways in scientific studies of understanding protein needs. And these studies are showing that our protein needs are much higher than the RDIs state. Secondly, the RDIs are set at a certain level to avoid the symptoms of disease and deficiency. In other words, the RDI is the absolute bare minimum we need in order to survive. But this speaks nothing of the optimal level to support good health. And there are many researchers and practitioners out there who are very vocal about needing much higher levels of protein intake. Here are the ideal ranges that I'm aiming for with the women that I work with, and this is based on my research and understanding of this more contemporary research around protein and what's actually needed for optimal health for our metabolism and for our recovery and our physical health, not just what's needed to prevent deficiency. The ideal range I'm aiming for is between 1.5 grams to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So this is what I mean about needing to calculate based on weight. Just bear with me because I'm going to give a few practical examples and do the calculations with you to show you how it works. Now there's going to be individual variability in terms of what end or what point of that range a woman needs to aim for, depending on what stage she's in the perinatal period. So for women who are in earlier pregnancy, they can aim for the lower end of that. Women in late stage pregnancy might aim a bit higher, and then women who are in the very early postpartum period, so like that 4th trimester where they're doing a lot of physical healing, they'll aim for the higher end, as well as anyone who's breastfeeding, especially breastfeeding a younger baby, because the nutritional needs are higher. So they'll also aim for that higher end. Then those who are later in their postpartum journey, 7, to 12 months, their protein needs will probably, decrease, so they might be able to aim for the lower end again. Or women who continue to breastfeed, if they're breastfeeding an older baby or a toddler, the nutritional needs are going to decrease again as baby relies less on milk and more on foods for their nutritional needs. Anyone who has weight loss as a goal should be aiming for the higher end of that range. Those optimal levels that I referred to, 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram, they might even be increased again if a mother has returned to moderate or intense physical activity. So things like weights training and resistance training, any running or cardiovascular exercise, or things like HIIT training. That will all increase your need for protein, sometimes quite significantly. And so again, there's going to be individual variability, maybe an increased need here. Depending on your background or what you may or may not already know about protein, these levels might sound high to you, and they are much higher than the RDI. For women who are non-pregnant and not breastfeeding, the RDI is 0.75 grams per kilogram of body weight. For a pregnant woman, it's 1.0 grams per kilogram of body weight. And for lactating or breastfeeding women, it's 1.1 grams per kilogram of body weight. But these levels are not reflective of the optimal level. These are the bare minimums to prevent a deficiency. If exploring this idea around new optimal levels of protein intake interests you, I recommend checking out the work of Dr. Ted Naiman, Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, and Diana Rogers RD. Now let's do a few examples to illustrate how these calculations work.
All right, so let's start with an example of a 65 kilogram woman, mother. She's 5 months postpartum and exclusively breastfeeding. I'd say we're going to aim for 1.7 grams per kilogram for her. So you can see that works out to be 110 grams. Let's do a 70 kilo woman who is 9 months postpartum. She is not breastfeeding and she has no weight loss goals. So we're going to aim a bit lower for about 1.5 grams per kilogram. That's kind of the lower end of the range, and you can see that that works out to be 105 grams of protein a day. One more example, let's have a look at a 60 kilogram woman. She's in the 4th trimester, so that very early healing phase from birth. She is exclusively breastfeeding, so we're going to aim high. She's healing, she's breastfeeding, so 2 grams per kilogram, so 120 grams.
You can see from those examples that the amounts are sitting around that 100 grams of protein or higher, which is why my general recommendation is 100 grams of mostly high quality animal source proteins. But you can use that simple calculation, that simple formula to calculate your own needs. I stand firmly behind saying that anyone who hits that 100 grams of high quality protein every day will notice the difference. It makes such a difference. And again, I touch on all those benefits in my previous video. The vast majority of people are grossly under eating protein compared to this level. To do the calculation, use your most recent body weight that you know of, or if you don't weigh yourself, you can take like a best guess, maybe overestimating instead of underestimating if you can, because we do want to hit that higher level rather than under consuming our protein. And if weight loss is at all part of your health goals, then we're using the weight of your goal weight, your ideal weight. So if you weigh 85 kilograms and you'd like to be 75, use 75 in your calculation. So what does 100 grams of protein look like in reality? I have a blog post all on protein-rich breakfasts with a bunch of examples of what a meal of like 25 to 30 grams of protein will look like. So I'll link that below if you want to jump over there and have a look at the numbers. It also includes a table with a full breakdown of the high quality protein, other proteins, and then serving sizes and amounts. So it's a really good resource if you're new to this and you just want to wrap your head around like protein foods and how much you'll need to eat. But I'll run through a few examples here now. Using breakfast as our example, 25 to 30 grams of protein is going to look like 3 eggs with a side of something else with protein, so like bacon or sausage, a cup of Greek yogurt with some paleo granola, so that's going to contain some of those plant sources of protein like your nuts and seeds, a cottage cheese breakfast bowl, baked eggs with ground beef, bacon or chorizo mixed in, smoked salmon on toast with maybe some feta cheese and a little bit of avocado, smashed avo with tin sardines or tin tuna. Leftovers are obviously an option here too, so eating what you had for lunch or dinner the next day. And protein powder smoothies can also be a really convenient option for busy mornings or the mornings you don't feel like cooking. Whole food sources of protein are preferable, but of course, this is a nice option to have on hand too. It can take a little while to build up to this level because it's usually quite a bit more than we're used to eating or we were eating in the past. Expect that it's probably going to take you a little bit of while to understand about protein-rich foods, think about ways to begin incorporating them into your meals, and also building up an appetite for it. So that can often take quite a few weeks. So set realistic expectations for yourself. Past breakfast, so our lunch and our dinner, we're also trying to aim for around that sort of 30 grams of protein so that we can get 30 at breakfast, 30 at lunch and 30 at dinner. And then, with the help of some snacks and protein-rich snacks, we're gonna get across that line to our 100 grams or more if that's what we need. Other foods that you can include is really, it's really up to you and your food preferences. But, for lunch and dinner, it's usually looking like 100 grams of meat, or fish or poultry or seafood, or a couple of eggs. You just have to remember that eggs don't contain as much protein as the meats will. Per large egg, it's only 6 grams. So you can imagine you'll have to have 3 eggs just to get to that 18 gram point. And a lot of us have an upper limit of how many eggs we can eat in one sitting. 100 grams of the actual meat in the meal is going to give us around about the 30 grams of protein. Then we can add, to those meals with our meat and our poultry and our fish or whatever we've chosen, we can add in some of those plant-based sources as well to help us get across the line, as well as add in, variety and flavor to our meals. So, hummuses, chickpeas in our stews, nuts and seeds in our salads, those kind of things. If you're wondering where to start, I do believe that starting with breakfast is really the best place. It's often the meal where we're consuming the least amount of protein, but arguably it's the meal that is most important for eating a protein-rich meal because it's really setting ourselves up for the day ahead. It's setting us up for stable or unstable energy levels, stable mood or unstable mood. It can make the difference between cravings and then how much we eat later in the day. And really this largely centers around regulating and stabilizing our blood sugar from the start of the day. If we start the day with stable blood sugar, we're really setting ourselves up for success. Energy, focus, concentration, less cravings, feeling fuller for longer. And these are all things that mothers routinely express concern about in my practice, and that's why I really recommend starting with breakfast. I hope that helps you to understand how much protein you need, why it's beneficial to aim for higher protein intakes than the RDI, and what that protein intake level looks like, in reality on your plate day to day. Don't forget to check out that blog post I mentioned because it has lots of resources that you can refer back to. That table with the protein foods is downloadable so you can save your own copy. And I hope to see you in the next video.